Greetings and welcome to the Provident Vox, where we discuss various aspects of the occult and magic without the bullshit.
You are here with us,
Baron Aragni
and Baronessa Aragni, your hosts, published authors, and occultists with around 40 years of combined practical experience in various magical paradigms and paths.
Today's episode will be all about sigils, seals, veves, and firmas. What are they? What are their differences? What can they be used for? And much more.
Before we begin, if you enjoy our podcast, please like, subscribe, and share so that more people can discover this podcast, because after all, we're battling against the algorithm of modernity.
What is a sigil? Well, there are many examples in the occult world of sigils, and there are many different, perspectives on what a sigil actually is. When we look up the word sigil, it comes back to the same thing. So that in it by itself doesn't actually explain what a sigil is. A sigil can take the form of many variables. In essence, it's an expression of the individual's will and desire, which he or she makes manifest upon a paper in the form of lines, dots, curls, twirls, and so on.
When making a sigil, you can either take the automatic drawing kind of approach to it, where your hand just does as it wants while you are focusing on your intent, of course. You can also make use of alchemical symbols. You can make use of symbols that you personally relate to as an individual. Basically, there are no rules to creating a sigil as long as the sigil reflects your will and desire as a practitioner.
Yes, an example of this sigil creation is if you think of your intent. For example, I want a new car, and then you just open up your creative side, close your eyes, for example, lightly rest the pen on a paper, and then let your hand and your subconscious do all the work. In essence, that will be a manifestation of your personal intent and will, that which you want desired. For example, in this case, yet again, it's I want a new car. Then that symbol itself will be a representation of that. Or you can also have more positive and affirmed statements such as I have a new car, and then you do the same thing.
Sometimes when using this method, it may look a little bit like chicken scratch, if we have to be honest. So sometimes you want it to look a little bit more refined, and this is all up to personal preferences, what you want it to look like, and of course if you can relate to it. So taking the example of I want a new car, then you can look at correspondences of a car. Let's just say it's movement. It is getting you from one point to another, joining two different points to each other. So then you can, for example, use alchemical symbols of Mercury and so forth to then combine it all together as a sigil, either in conjunction with what you've already done or just by itself.
So in essence, a sigil is something which reflects the desire or the will of the individual, which in turn will manipulate, alter, or change his or her microcosm.
Indeed. Now, moving on, what is a seal? Now, many people tend to confuse sigils and seals with each other, and we suppose that they can be very similar, however, they're not the same at all.
No. In comparison to a sigil, a seal is much more defined. You can see it as every symbol that appears on a seal, it's like empty, without the essence, energy, or element which grants it power, whether it's one of the 5 elements or whether it's a planetary element, etc. and so forth, or even an entity which is linked to directly. That changes the whole of the seal itself.
A distinction which we also like to provide between sigils and seals is that a sigil is something that you as a practitioner basically create yourself to various purposes. However, a seal is more related, as mentioned, onto a higher ideal or an entity, spirit, or intelligence. In these cases where it's directly linked to an entity and so forth, they tend to either guide you through the process or they may even provide you with one.
Yes, where there's no entity involved, it's dependent on the occultists themselves to attribute the correct glyphs, symbols, runes, and so forth to have the desired effect.
So that's sigils and seals. In most grimoires and so on and so forth that you will encounter, these two terms will be used quite a lot. So there you have the basic difference between a sigil and a seal.
What is a Veve? A Veve is almost like a pictorial seal. However, in most cases, it defines the character, principality and power of a specific entity and that which you wish to work with, communicate with, conjure or summon.
Needless to say, the term Veve is very much related to voodoo, hoodoo, and the African diasporic traditions in particular, where, gosh, you just have to Google Veve and then you will get so many for the various barons, the Gede, the Petro, you name it. Now, those pictures that you see, as you will be able to distinguish when looking at, let's just say, a seal from, let's just say, Western occultism, from the Goetia, as an example, and you compare it to what a Veve looks like. A Veve is far more pictorial, less alchemical, and more pictorial in its general composition.
Yes, in most cases it is a childlike rendition with some aspects of geometry involved. Unlike Western tradition of seals and sigils, thereby you can see the difference. In the Western tradition of seals and sigils, there's more geometry, sacred geometry, and etc. and so forth involved. Whereas with a Veve, there's less of that and more, how can we say, pictorial representations.
But before one thinks that such a very simple pictorial rendition is perhaps lesser or weaker in its application, this is dead wrong, okay? Make no mistake. A pictorial rendition of your intent or trying to link it to an entity sometimes can, depending on the creator, depending on your focus, depending on your will, intent, and ritual setup, can sometimes be more powerful and effective than modern sigilization.
Definitely. In some aspects, the pictorial seal works on your primal self. So it's a universal language by itself which everyone can understand without the need for the written format thereof. So yeah, it is very powerful.
And that's also what makes it so interesting. So moving on to something which we'll say is, in its composition is similar to a Veve, a Firma.
What is a Firma? Firma is much more complex than a sigil, seal or a Veve because it's a representation not only of spirits in some cases, but also the movement of energy.
Now, what do we mean by this? Firma, just a quick note, Firmas by themselves are also subdivided into another category, however we will discuss this shortly. Firstly though, a Firma, if you look at it, you will see that it looks a lot like a Veve in its composition. However, it does contain a lot more particular elements, such as arrows, crosses and circles, serpents, skulls, and so forth and so on. Now, this does not just relate, as mentioned, to that which you wish to work with or the entity, but rather the energy and how it moves. And here as well, symbolism plays an extremely large role. If, for example, you look at a Firma and with it you see a skull present somewhere on the Firma itself, then just by deduction you can tell that the spirit or entity that this is linked to is not wholly light or of the right-hand path, shall we call it. They are more fierce and in most times they are necromantic in nature.
Yes, indeed. As we mentioned, there's two parts of the Firma. However, we will be discussing the Firma itself. The Firma, as a standard, is a representation of a higher power, such as an ascended spirit, which in the tradition of Palo Mayombe and Palo Monte is made use of. And yes, let me go on over to my better half to explain the other uses of the Firma.
Okay, the other uses of the Firma. We personally would rather make a distinguishment between a Firma and its brother, shall we call it, the Patipemba. Now, a Firma and a Patipemba is almost the same thing. If you look at them, they look almost exactly the same with similar elements involved, the same childlike symbolism and so on and so forth. However, it has one main distinction. Firmas are for working with entities. A Patipemba is a spell work or a instruction, a pictorial instruction for a spirit or for energies on what you want manifested and how they should go about doing this.
As you can note the difference, the Firma is for a specific entity such as an agent of death, and the Patipemba is an instructional map basically for the spirits or the energy that you will make use of in your spell work, directing them, telling them what to do, what not to do, etc. and so forth.
The nice thing about a Patipemba is that just like a sigil, you do not need to make use of a entity or intelligence in order to make use of it. It will lend it potency and power. Let's just be honest about that. But you do not need them in order to manifest that what you want, because a Patipemba instructs energy as well. So that's absolutely lovely to use. It's an excellent tool. Actually, all of these are most excellent tools for a practitioner to use.
In regards to Firma, so when you draw it up as a Patipemba, then each person has spirits already attached to them, especially as a practitioner of the occult arts. So that will inevitably instruct those spirits which is attached to you as an individual on what to do and what not to do, whether it's to bring forth prosperity, for healing, for love, romance, lust, or even to destroy an enemy. So those spirits will already know what to do via the Patipemba.
Exactly. So we think we basically just boiled it down to the basics there to distinguish them apart for you. So let's move on. The general difference between them, we will group it in, let's just say, a set of 3. We shall group the sigil and seal together and the Veve and Firma together. Why? Mainly Western or more modern occultism.
Yes.
And ancient occultism.
Okay, so we've already explained the sigil and the seal and how they work. So the Veve and Firma is that of African diasporic tradition. And we personally prefer pictorial renditions in regards to seal or sigils, etc. and so forth. And we've already explained why we do, well, what a great impact Firmas especially has, and pictorial seals. Now you as an individual can draw up your seal. We will call all these sigils, seals, Veve and Firma, we'll just call them seals for now, for ease of reference. So you as an individual can draw up your seal in any manner that you wish. However, there is some guidelines and rules which you must follow, especially when it comes to the Firmas. Okay, you must have a great knowledge on symbolism which relates to the Firma themselves. Otherwise, you can draw something up which is in conflict with itself and then wreak havoc upon you and your loved ones, etc. and so forth. Now, when you render that as a pictorial image, you must always remember the primal elements which must be present within that seal. That means the flow of energy, whether it is of a lighter nature, whether it is of a darker nature, whether it's governed by the sun or moon, or which element should be present. Element meaning such as air, earth, fire and water, and also planetary energies.
And also, what must it do or what is related to this particular situation or entity, as an example?
Yes, so it must all flow in harmony with one another and come together, which will clearly, represent your intention.
The same actually goes for sigils and veves and so on as well. You need, firstly, what is this for? What is this? What do you want with this? Do you want to link it to an entity? Is this going to be for a spell? Are you going to use it as it is in and of itself? Are you going to use it in conjunction with words of power or other spellwork elements? What do you want with this?
Yes, so that means you must also do a heck of a lot of research on the subject of glyphs, seals, a meaning of the runes and smaller details which you will be putting inside of your seal to form a bigger whole. So yeah, we don't suggest any novice to actually create a Firma or Veve or a seal which relates to an external entity. Rather get the experience and the knowledge, and then you can create the seal, Veve, or the Firma relates to entities. The sigil is basic. Anyone can do this. Anyone. Because this doesn't have anything to do with an external entity. This is all about the expression of yourself, your desires, and which you want to make manifest within your microcosm.
Exactly. Also, to keep in mind is not just what you want or how it is, but you must be able to relate to the sigil that you have created. This is absolutely dire if you draw something up, and even though it is in line with your will and intent and desire, however, you're just looking at this thing and you know what, it looks like a piece of shit, you cannot relate to it whatsoever, then don't use it, because then the effects will in turn also not manifest properly.
Yes, you must remember, in the occult, association is key. Like Baronessa said, if you cannot associate with something, you better get rid of that thing and find a workaround for it, or create something from scratch in which you can associate. In most cases, when you as an individual create something, then association is automatic, because you are its creator and you are God of that image.
So moving on, what can you use them for? Well, the sky's the limit, honestly. That's the bit of silence here on our side. You can use it for absolutely anything. Linking it to an entity, love, lust, prosperity, luck, curses, destruction, whatever you can think of, that's what you can use it for.
Sigils in general are dependent on your level of spiritual power and ascension as well, because you can draw up a sigil, but if you don't have any ounce of spiritual power through ascension, then it will not work to its effectiveness as what it actually is capable of. So the key there as well is building up your spiritual power as an individual.
And, well, the concept of spiritual power is a little bit of a big subject, so we'll probably make another episode about that. But remember that spiritual power, experience, all of this falls in line with the efficacy or the effectiveness of what you have created.
Indeed. Okay, this is how you basically use a sigil. For those of you who's a complete novice and have no idea, as we mentioned before, this is a simple method. You can just close your eyes, think of your intent, take a pen in your hand while your eyes are still closed if you wish, and then let it rest lightly on a paper, and let your hand just draw out a symbol, a line, a dot, or a curve. And once your hands comes to a rest and it ceases moving, that is your sigil.
Now, after you have created your sigil using this very, very simple example, the deployment, you have so many options. As many options as you have what a sigil can stand for, that is how many options you have at deployment. You can carry it with you and gaze upon it, thinking about your intent. You can burn it in a candle flame and let it render onto ash and scatter that ash into the winds to make it manifest, to carry your intent forth into the ether. You can make that form part of other spell components. People enjoy jars for some very strange reason, so you can put it in a jar for whatever reason you want. You can hang it somewhere, you can hide it somewhere. But the point is, irrelevant of its deployment, how you use it, remember your will and intent, even after you have created that, whether you use it in an evocation, whether you use it with words of power, it does not matter. Even though your intent is depicted in that sigil that you have created, you must still focus on your desire, your will and intent, to reinforce that within yourself. And as we always say, as within, so without, that is an excellent example of what's at play here. Because when it's reinforced within you, as one of the forms of deployment, so it will reflect in your microcosm, in your world around you.
Indeed. Now, another method of creating a sigil is using a word of power. You can take the planetary camea, there's 7 of them. Each one looks like a grid of numbers, or traditionally it will be more like the Hebrew Aleph Beth upon it. But we suggest you take the numbers. Now, a word of power is a shorthand of your intent, what you want to achieve. So if you take the word, let's just say the word as it is, let's just say the word is Abba, and you use it on a planetary square of sun in accordance, then that will form lines. You follow each letter which you attribute a number to, and vice versa, and then it will draw up a sigil. It will form a sigil, okay? And then that by itself is the word of power in the form of geometry, and then a sigil. Now you can take that same sigil, draw it up against a wall, or the floor, or the ceiling, or outside of your home to have a specific effect, such as protection or drawing in clients, etc. and so forth.
So how to use them, what they can be used for, the sky is honestly the limit. There is no limit. The only limit that there is on them is what you place on yourself.
Yes, we've written a couple of free PDFs on the subject matter of sigils and how to employ them and make use of them. So that will be quite handy for you as well.
And also, if you are interested in more advanced applications, we have a few digital courses available as well as custom-made courses per individual. So there's always that if you are very interested in the concept of sigil magic. Alright, so there you have it. This is a very vast subject, yet a very simple one at the same time, and we can honestly say that we believe that we have summed up the whole concept of sigils, seals, Veve, and Firma in, 23 short minutes, actually.
Yeah, we cannot give enough details that would defeat the purpose of this whole podcast as being an educational platform. Thank you all for listening, and we hope that you'll join us again next week, Wednesday, for another episode. We're always open to suggestions or recommendations on topics you would like to hear about, so do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Please like and subscribe to this podcast to be kept up to date on new episodes as they are uploaded. Find us on various platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, Spreaker, Deezer, Spotify, and others. Also, feel free to visit our parent website at arachnearcaneservices.com.
We would also like to take this time to thank you for all the amazing feedback we have gotten concerning our first episode and the launch of this podcast.
Yes, truly, thank you very much for that. We honestly did not expect such excellent feedback so soon with only one episode at the time under our belt, so truly thank you for that.
You guys are awesome, thank you.
As above, so below.
As within, so without.